So today we're going to talk about horror as a metaphor, kind of why we decided to choose horror in our game Fracture Echoes of the Mind, and why we wanted to kind of tie it into the experiences of mental illness and neurodiversity. So I will introduce myself. I'm Kesley, the creative director of Fracture Echoes of the Mind, also CEO and founder of Chaotic Pause Studios. And I am joined with the narrative team from Chaotic Pause Studios that are also working on Fracture Echoes of the Mind. Go ahead and introduce yourselves. Beamsy.
Hi, I'm Matt, also known as Beamsy. I'm one of the narrative designers on the team. Yeah, that's me.
Awesome.
I'm Kirsty, also one of the narrative designers on the team. Delighted to be here.
Love it. All right, well let's dive in then. So really the first question to start with is why? Why are we deciding to use horror as a metaphor to portray the experiences of mental illness and neurodiversity? I guess I'll kind of get started since I started the narrative journey with it. Initially, my intention of creating a psychological horror game with mental illness and neurodiversity was that a lot of times when the negatives of like the struggles and the challenges of mental illness and neurodiversity are experienced by individuals, it can sort of feel like a horrific experience. You know, a depression spiral can feel like you are literally in the depths of darkness and can't crawl your way out of it. And, you know, sometimes your brain says things to you that, of course, are not true, but at the moment you believe it. So kind of false ideas, hallucinations, things like that. Whether it's not, it doesn't have to necessarily be a visual hallucination. It could also be more of a cognitive hallucination, right? Where your brain is telling you one thing that's not actually true. But unfortunately, that can affect how you see the world, how you see yourself, how you see other people. And it's a rough spot to be in. And it's the idea behind, you know, using horror is that there's an underlying theme of survival and wanting to figure out how to survive these things, because, you know, if it's untreated or if it's exacerbated or if it's an intense wave of a spiral or things like that, it can be very overwhelming and kind of feel like it's hard to survive and hard to figure out how to go about your day to day when internally it's I wouldn't say a horror show, but internally, you know, there's a lot going on that is messing your perception of things up, whether it's the perception of yourself or the perception of a situation, things like that. A lot of times with anxiety, it can feel like a constant presence. Same with depression too, a constant presence in your brain that's not your own, that's just constantly telling you these things, um, which can feel horrific. You know, literally something is fighting against your every survival instinct, which is kind of why I thought psychological horror would be a great medium for this, because in a psychological horror game, you are essentially surviving. You're trying to find ways to survive. Now, you know, there's things to combat and stuff like that. You know, um, you can, in certain games, you can kill things with weapons and shotguns and all that. Um, in this game, not so much. We don't have combat, so really, it is a mental warfare for the characters. And psychological horror kind of lends itself to creating a narrative that helps us create a character that can figure out sort of what's going on in their brain, right? Um, in the game itself, there are the physical manifestations of horror, so in the environment, in the creatures, and things like that, um, which add an extra layer onto kind of what they're experiencing. So instead of all of this simply being in their mind, it is out in the open, right? So it creates also a vulnerability for these characters, um, for other characters in the game to be able to see sort of what their most traumatic experiences are and the fear that they have about certain things. But overall, I wanted to create a game that I think helps people think about what it is that these experiences are, how they affect even an actual person's life, right? Not just the character's life. How people with these real lived experiences have to navigate this survival techniques while also living their day-to-day life. And it's a real rough situation sometimes to be in. So that is my spiel. Feel free to give your own.
I think, yeah, I think what's interesting for me about it as a what's really interesting, what's really nice about the project and the game in itself is that one of the things that we're doing is it's a way of demonstrating the experience, and that's one of the aims, is to demonstrate the lived experience of neurodiversity, of mental illness or mental health, and that's why it's such a because it can be such a struggle if you're stuck in the middle of it, but sometimes it can be really hard to explain and for other people who don't necessarily have those struggles to understand. So sometimes I get migraines, and when I get them bad, I describe them as there's a team of dwarves trying to drill out of my head, and there's another team of dwarves trying to drill into my head. And you can sort of do that with a thing because it's a physical pain thing.
Mm-hmm.
You can't. It's not as easy to give an example and a descriptive example necessarily for a condition like depression, or you can give it, but it doesn't necessarily convey it as well. Whereas the joy of something like, what Fracture will be able to do is it gives us a way of giving a physical within the game, like a physical representation of the thing in a way that I think will be understandable and easy to engage with, and hopefully give another perspective and a clearer perspective for people who aren't necessarily feeling or don't necessarily feel the same struggles.
Mm-hmm.
And we can demonstrate the overwhelm and the effect of the overwhelm and of the relentless that sense of an imposing presence and a consistent imposing presence, or a sense of pressure. You can demonstrate that with a metaphorical thing in the game, which hopefully it's something that people will be able to say, well, go and play this, or go and watch some videos of somebody playing this. This is how it feels. I've always, if somebody asks what I see when I take my glasses off, I always say there's a bit in the film Gattaca, which is a wonderful film, go and watch it. There's a bit in the film Gattaca where a guy takes his contact lenses off so he can't see, and then he has to cross a busy street.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it's filmed, that's what my vision is like without my glasses on. So I can always go and say, it's like this moment. So hopefully what we'll be able to achieve with the game is that level of comparison, so that somebody can say it's Fracture captures it. That's what we do. Yeah, and I think that's why, and because it can be so traumatic and it can be so hard to deal with and such a crippling thing for people who suffer from all manner of things like neurodiversity, different types of neurodiversity and depression and anxiety. It gives us an opportunity to show the extremes that are very real for the people who suffer it, but are almost incomprehensible for the people who don't.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably me waffling for enough now.
No, absolutely. It makes total sense.
Yeah, I think horror is such a great medium for it, because it is kind of, the genre is so visceral, and it can paint such a vivid picture, in the way that some other genres can't. And kind of, as you were saying, Beamsy, the using those metaphors to create those experiences and demonstrate them, because every lived experience of neurodiversity or mental health, it is different, and it will be described in these very visceral metaphors, like you know, from my own lived experience, depression can feel like sinking, or having like weight in your bones. And if you think about the way that's kind of described, and it might just be me as a person who is a bit visceral and strange and whatever, but there's something I feel inherently kind of horrific about that. And so I think it's just it's a really fun area to play in, because you can then externalize that. You can visualize that in, you know, a dense kind of water world that's like crystallizing, because it's just been kind of stewing there for so long, and constantly fluctuating. I think it's also interesting as well, because horror and mental health have had such interesting relationship historically.
Very tactfully put. Well done.
Yeah. And you know, I think our media does, it kind of echoes into the world, but it also absorbs it. So you know, you play a game where, you know, it's all mental health asylums, and you know, there's straitjackets, whatever, people playing through that, you know, that's cemented into their mind as something that is, you know, quite real. You know, that we're constantly learning about ourselves, and I think we're still seeing lots of very outdated portrayals of mental health, neurodivergency, and it's used to other us.
Yes.
And even if, you know, you don't necessarily believe that, you still have that playing in the back of your mind as, oh, I'm crazy, or do you know what I mean? Like, you're using those terms.
Absolutely,
Aren't right, aren't fitting, aren't representative. And so I think it's using horror is actually a really empowering way to play with those themes.
I think there's something in, and I think there's something in the other thing about horror as a genre is it's very popular and people really enjoy it, and they really enjoy playing horror games because people are crazy people, silly people, not crazy. But I think there's something nice in that there's a draw to a game like Fracture because it's an intriguing experience. There's the elements of horror are there, but as a way of drawing somebody in as a player, and then actually them through playing realizing and learning that actually these are, you know, this is born out of lived experience. This is very much as a game, as a way of starting a conversation. That's a really exciting opportunity, I think, that we have as a creative team, using this as a format to tell those sorts of stories that can then hopefully will resonate with people, even if it's only elements of it resonate with individuals. And then, it gives us a really exciting opportunity to hopefully ignite some conversations and spark some conversations, which then allow people to dive in and find out more, and hopefully consider their own those ingrained, like you were saying, Kirsty, the things that are kind of those ingrained senses of, well, asylums are bad, straitjackets mean this, you know, this otherness that has been pushed and continues to be perpetuated, maybe it will hopefully inspire them to, there's an opportunity to start a conversation which makes people reflect on what biases do they have, what inherent kind of learned truths of they got in their brains that maybe they want to readdress or reconsider.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, besides being able to authentically represent the experiences of neurodiverse people or people with mental health issues, is that it also brings awareness, right, to these lived experiences, first of all, to, you know, what people are going through and the struggles they have and things like that, but also, you know, to create the sense of awareness that people who deal with these things are not broken. We're not, you know, we're not crazy, we're not broken, we're not a liability. You know, there's a lot of stigma and misrepresentation that comes with mental illness and neurodiversity, and I think that is an extremely important lesson to teach people, is that, you know, what we hear from society or from the news or from, you know, even literature, you know, reading things and stuff like that. Um, as you mentioned, Kirsty, like, we're always learning about ourselves, right? And on top of that, you know, science and medicine is constantly learning about these things as well. And so there is that constant, oh, well, this is not what this is anymore, it's actually this. And so you are kind of relearning yourself over and over again. But I think besides just learning about yourself, it's important to learn about other people and, like, to learn what it is that these things actually change in someone's life, you know, the struggles and the challenges that they face, but also the strengths that they can get from it, whether it's strengths from the diversity in their thinking, or it's strengths from the coping mechanisms that they've put into place to deal with certain things. I think these are all very important things to also showcase in the game as well, because, you know, our neurodiversity and mental illness are not only negatives, right? A lot of people think that. A lot of people tend to stigmatize people for being too sensitive or too vulnerable or, you know, quote unquote crazy. But in reality, we're just people. You know, we are just people that think differently, for whatever reason, you know, whether it's a mental illness or neurodiversity. And it's something to be empathetic towards, not stigmatized. You know, everyone has stuff that they're going through. Some people have more stuff, some people have less stuff. And, you know, as we know, everyone has their own experience with mental illness and neurodiversity. Not, there's no one size fits all. But in the game, you know, we're hoping to at least pick certain things, certain aspects that people really struggle with or that they really like about their neurodiversity, and showcase these things to show that, you know, not everybody hates being neurodiverse or have mental health. Some people definitely dislike it because of the struggles that they go through, but also there are things to be proud of, you know, even if it's just being proud of getting yourself out of bed, right? Just going about your day, even when you're struggling internally. That's a strength in itself. You know, not everybody can do that. And when you can, it's something to, I think, highlight and show that, again, we're not broken. We are just human beings dealing with different things, that unfortunately we need a little more help with, you know, support, whether it comes from friends and family, whether it comes from psychologists, psychiatrists. You know, we just need a little bit extra support, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's going to be something really special to talk about in this game. But tying it back into the horror element, you know, the idea is really just being able to get through all of these struggles and figuring out, for the characters, figuring out maybe why they have these struggles, figuring out themselves, you know, what they like and don't like about each other or themselves, and figuring out how to not only cope in their own brain, you know, being able to reconcile with certain things and being able to see the things that they need a little extra help with, or things that they really enjoy that come out of their brain because of these things. You know, with ADHD, yes, it's annoying sometimes, many times, but also like it helps me with being creative and thinking outside the box and being able to focus on something for long periods of time in order to complete stuff. So I think even though we are focusing on a horror gameplay, there's still a lot of things that we can put out there that provide hope, or, you know, provide a sense of awareness and support for people who need it. And I think that's really something special that we can do with this game.
Yeah, it's unbelievably helpful to have representation.
Yeah.
So like, for example, again, speaking to my own lived experience of OCD, until someone was like, have you considered it might be this because this? You know, I thought I was wired wrong. There was no hope for me. I thought I was, you know, I thought some like horrible things about myself. But being able to see yourself represented makes you realize that you are not alone.
Yeah.
And I think just like you were talking about, you know, it is very strange to say like there's an upside to, you know, some conditions. So with my OCD, it's awful. I get images thrown at me, and it's kind of helpful as a horror writer, to be fair. But I'm like, oh god, this is terrible. Constantly inspired. But at the same time, because I'm like, I I have a friend who's celiac, and I'm really good at spotting the ingredients to making sure that they don't eat something that's got gluten in. Like there's just weird upsides like that. Just thinking about how horror has progressed, and well, what horror genre has already always looked at, and it's, you know, very kind of obvious to say, but it's always looked at what scared us, as, you know, as a society, on like a individual level. So looking at Frankenstein, when that was written, it was really playing into those fears at the time of those scientific advancements. You know, what could those advancements mean? And I think, you know, there is a ton of fear mongering going on today. I'm not going to say names or anything like that, but you know, there is an element of, you know, as someone who didn't know that they had OCD, you know, that my lived experiences were frightening. And, you know, for other people, it, you know, it's not under that lack of understanding about someone's condition, the things that they need, it can additionally other us. And, you know, I think horror is just a really good way of examining the fears in the society and our personal fears. And, you know, a lot of horrors don't have a happy ending. Nor do they necessarily need to. But what we have a really good chance, a good opportunity to hear, is to show the things that scare us, but also that there's ways forward. You know, when no one is guaranteed a happy ending, that's just life. That's just, you know, stories that aren't, you know, Cinderella. But there is always hope, I think.
Yeah.
There is always, if there's a willingness to fight, then there's always hope, and horror is always about that willingness to fight as well, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Going off of the othering part of it, you know, a lot of, as you're mentioning, a lot of horror in whatever medium does tend to other those with mental illness and neurodiversity. You know, creating labels for people with different illnesses or disorders, and it does create that misconception that, you know, people who do struggle with these things are crazy, or they're too different, or they're you know, they're unable to function in society because of what they deal with, which is obviously not true. You know, we all function in society in our own way. Some better than others, some need more support than others. You know, it looks different for each person. But, you know, by having the underlying tie between horror and these lived experiences as othering and as something that is, you know, hopeless, basically, as you're saying, Kirsty, of like, you know, that's not the case. That's not an authentic representation of what we go through. We are not other. We we may have more struggles internally in our brains than other people do, but that's not to say that we can't survive and we can't find coping mechanisms or healthy ways to deal with things, or build, you know, relationships with people that support and understand us. As you were talking about your own experience, you know, with my own experience as well, like being diagnosed as an adult, it sucked. It, you know, it was a whole life of not knowing why I was quote unquote broken or too much. And that does create a lot of stress and trauma and fear, even to this day. You know, the things that were pushed upon me and many other people with these experiences, if not most people with these experiences, is that, you know, you start to have a very low self-worth. You think that you are not, that's not to say everybody feels this way, but, you know, at least for my experience, you start to feel like there's something wrong with you, and that, you know, that does mess with your mental health. You know, you sometimes neurodiversity and mental illness can also go hand in hand. You know, even though I have ADHD, I also have depression and anxiety on top of it. Some of it is caused by the ADHD, some of it is just there. It's just hanging out in the background. But, you know, when you do get this external pressure to be something you're not, and to pretend even to be something you're not, you know, masking yourself to pretend to be a normal quote unquote human, it's a lot of stress, and it creates anxiety and fear that you're not going to be accepted by people that you meet, and not being able to trust people because you feel like they're going to leave you once they figure out how weird you are or how sensitive you are or things like that. And that's really unfair to people that deal with these experiences, because, like I mentioned earlier, we're just people. You know, we're just people we're just little guys. Yeah, we're little guys trying to just get through the world. And it can feel like it's on hard mode a lot of times. But external pressures and the stigmatism or stigmatization of, not the stigmatism,
Yeah.
stigmatization of individuals with these experiences, it unfortunately does way more harm than good. And so one of the original ideas I had as to bringing horror into this narrative is kind of what you already talked about, which is I wanted to fight against the common occurrence of horror just othering others and thinking that your sanity or mental stability or something like that is a problem, and it's something that needs to be solved, or it's something that needs to be fought against, which is not necessarily the case, right? And so by hopefully creating a horror narrative that shows more empathy and acceptance and hope, like you mentioned, hope that the characters themselves can get through these experiences and figure out, one, why they act the way they do, figuring out themselves and figuring out how to essentially manage those, right? Managing their whatever struggles or challenges they may have with neurodiversity or mental illness. I would say Fracture, although it is a horror narrative, the underlying theme of it is really just, I guess, hope. Hope that when you put in the work and you have people around you to support you and who empathize and who see you for who you really are and not who they want you to be or who you're expected to be, that can create a lot of opportunities for people with mental illness and neurodiversity to flourish and to be able to find ways out of these spirals or hallucinations or things like that. And I just hope that people take away from this game what we're intending, right? Is to represent these characters authentically, to bring awareness.
Yeah.
And I hope that people that do deal with these things can play this game and resonate with it and think kind of what you said earlier, Matt, about, that's, well, both of you guys said it about, representation, like, oh, that's what I go through. You should play that game so you understand, or you should watch the trailer or something so you understand what I go through. But then also maybe they figure things out. There's a lot of people that are undiagnosed, as we know. I just found out I had ADHD again last year at age 38, which is insane that I went so long without knowing that and being able to have the coping mechanisms to deal with that. So maybe even people will play this game and resonate with certain things, and then they'll start to, question what they can do to manage these challenges that they might have or these symptoms that they might have. So that's kind of the hope of using the horror narrative, is just changing the conversation about how horror treats people with mental illness and neurodiversity. As you mentioned, Kirsty, there's a lot of fear that comes with being othered, whether it's by yourself or from those around you or from society. There's a lot of fear and trauma that comes with pretending to be something you're not accepting yourself because you're not accepted by others. And that can lead to more spirals, more mental health issues and things like that, which are horrific in their own way. So yeah. Beamsy, was there something else you wanted to add to all of that?
I think the thing through thinking all of these things, like for this conversation, but also just as we're working on the game, one of the things I always come back to is one of the first things you said to me about the project, which was that idea of neurodiversity and mental health as a lens through which you see the world, not a thing to be fixed, like you were saying. It isn't that, it isn't a brokenness that needs to be remedied. It's just that's the lens through which you see the world. And people who, and so one of the opportunities with Fracture is that by taking on the role of like stepping into the shoes of these characters, they'll be able to look through those lenses for a little bit, and they might see something that resonates directly with them and their own lived experience. They might see, it might give them a greater insight into the lived experience of people they know, whether they're close friends or family or they're strangers. And I think that's the opportunity. And because these experiences, that it can be a real struggle and it can be a horrific struggle at times, being able to, treat it as such and go through it as such, I think hopefully that, having those opportunities to look through those lenses, to see those moments of horror, but also see that actually within them there are paths to peace and there are paths to hope. And I think that's the exciting opportunity and the really kind of the privileged opportunity we've got with making a game like Fracture, to be able to do that. And hopefully it has the opportunity and the power to do some real good and to start conversations and potentially change some conversations and give some insights and allow people to find some insights that they wouldn't expect to find through playing a horror game. But life has its dark points and its light points, and they sit so close together. And I think that's an opportunity we've got to explore, and that's the joy of exploring it through this genre. I think that made some sort of sense. We'll see.
It did. It absolutely did. It really did.
Is it worth talking about, 'cause what we're creating are horror protagonists, right? But as the, not going too much into it, but the group of people that we have, I think it is going to be such a fascinating journey for, I mean, as a writer, but also for the players. Yeah. I wonder if anyone's got any thoughts on that.
No, absolutely. I mean, without going too much into it, because I realize it's a little out of scope for what we're talking about, but I think it does tie in, is that when I first came up with the characters, I thought, without diving into the characters themselves, but I thought that kind of what you were talking about, Matt, of I created these characters through the lens of their neurodiversity or mental illness. Not to say that that is someone's identity, because it's not. It's just part of who they are. But I know from my own experience that at least some of the things that I've been through because of my mental illness or neurodiversity has changed kind of who I am in my personality and the way I think about certain things. And so, yeah, I wanted to create these characters with that in mind, because it's not enough to just come up with a character and then tag on a mental illness or neurodiversity, because both of these things permeate throughout your life and throughout who you are as a person, whether it's good or bad. It could be positive, it could be negative, or it could be neutral, depending on the person's lived experience. But I think these protagonists are going to have there's going to be a lot of work for them to get from where they are in the beginning to where we hope they will be at the end. And, we're able to, because we're using physical manifestations of each individual character's traumas and fears that are connected and tied to their mental illness and neurodiversity, we're able to sort of dive into their perspectives, their different perspectives. And they're from, our characters are from different cultures and different races and different sexual orientations. And all of that, I think, creates a realistic representation of, these things are not bound to one culture or to one group of gender or anything like that. Anyone can have a mental illness or neurodiversity. Again, like we mentioned earlier, there's nothing wrong with that. We're not a group of people that should be pushed to the side or, ignored or othered. But, it does, obviously, depending on the culture and gender and things like that, there are special challenges that come with those tied identities in terms of mental illness and, neurodiversity representation. And and the idea of, you know, some cultures are more conservative when it comes to how to deal with these things. Some are more open. You know, there's not to say that, you know, any country or culture is necessarily doing anything wrong, or like one is better than the other, nothing like that. Overall, I think society as a whole, human beings as a whole, need to be better about how we treat mental health and neurodiversity. And we need to realize that anyone can be struggling with things that are invisible that we don't understand, right? And our characters are really rich in their trauma and fear that is tied to these things. And it's exciting. It's exciting to be able to tell these stories of different neurodiversities, different mental illnesses, um, and hopefully be able to change the conversation. That's my hope.
Yeah, I think there's something really unique about, because this isn't a normal situation that they're all plunked into, right?
Yeah.
So they've got these, you know, they're in this bizarre world, and then they're looking at this world together, but with their own lenses and with their own additional challenges and strengths.
Mhm.
And I think that's going to make for really interesting dynamics,
Mhm.
and gameplay,
Mm.
I
ultimately.
agree. All right. Well, I think we end there. I think we had a very, uh, very important discussion. I think just in terms of the topic, and I'm excited to continue this narrative and to flesh out these characters and the world that they're in, and work with, you know, people outside of our team for lived experiences, and, you know, more research on the variety of, you know, neurodiversity and mental illness that we're including. Um, it's an awesome project. It's an ambitious project, but
Yes.
I think it's definitely an important one. And
No, absolutely.
yeah. So again, thank you guys for being here, for explaining everything to the lovely people of the internet. And I guess we'll start again next time.